Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at creating a self-validating form. So what we're going to look at here is a very common technique, and it sort of slightly doesn't conform to Model 2 or Model View Controller architecture, but it's only a slight deviation from it. And it is an important technique, and in the future we'll look at how you could accomplish the same thing in a strict MVC way. So I'm going to create a new form here, so let's right click Web Content and go to New JSP, and let's call this self-validating form.jsp. Click Finish, and I'll go to one of my existing forms here. So I've got bean form, that will do nicely, and I'm going to paste that into my self-validating form.jsp. So at the moment I've got this form which has an email and password parameter, and that uses well, actually at the moment it doesn't, but there's also a bean here which it doesn't use at the moment, and this bean has an email and a password property, and it also has this validate method that returns true or false to say whether it can validate its properties or not, just by looking to see if the password is long enough and the email matches a certain pattern. And I've also got here this controller.java, which at the moment it doesn't look at the password property, but that's okay for our purposes here. But it does echo back the email property in the doPost method. So I'm going to put those pieces together here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, let's just run this form for a start, because I want to get the URL of it. And so the context root and the name of the file I can just copy here, and I'm going to make this form submit to itself. So let's just paste that in there, and I'll close one or two of these other things here. There we go, and get rid of that and that. Okay, so the action of this form means that it submits to the actual page that it's on. And now I'm going to add a bean here. Let's add a bean, JSP use bean, and I'll call this I'll call it user1, just because I've already got a bean called user in the session in the Eclipse browser, and I don't want to cause confusion. So let's call it user1, and I'll say that the class, of course, equals beans.user, my bean class there, and I'll set the scope equal to session. And I'm going to use this JSP set property command that I showed you before, and I need to set the name here equal to the ID of the bean, and I'm going to set property here, property not to a particular parameter but to star, which, as we saw before, means that if there are any parameters that match property names in the bean, namely email or password here, then this is going to set those properties using those parameter values. Actually, the way it knows which properties to use is it just depends on what we've got set methods for. So we've got a set email, and that means that if there's a property called email, then and there's a parameter called if there's a parameter called email submitted with this page, then this command will set it. Now I'm going to give the form controls here values. Now the value tag, in case you don't know, in HTML, this sets the text, the initial text that will appear in the form control, and sometimes you output stuff like enter your username here and make it appear in grey or something using a bit of CSS, Starsheet stuff. But here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that equal to, I'm going to use, I could use an expression tag here to get the current value, in this case of email, the email property for this bean. But I'm actually going to use just get property, which is absolutely equivalent to an expression tag with saying user.get email. But I just want to show you the JSP get property tag here. So if I say JSP get property and then I say name, so I have to name the bean again that I want to use, and say property equals email. Now what that will do is it will literally return a string corresponding to the value of the email property. So it's exactly like an expression tag with user1.getProperty in it. But I'm just using this just for a change, really, just so that you're familiar with it, in case you come across it. And here we'll get the password, value of the password property. And now I think that's good. So if I run that form now, let's have a look at what happens. So I'll make sure that self-validating form is selected down here, and I'll click the green run button. And I've got some error here. I don't quite know what I've done. Let's just check. Let's just maximize the editor. And I forgot to close the set property tag, so I need like a slash there, so it's kind of a self-contained tag. I think that should be good. So let's run it again. Try again. And there we go. Now what I wanted to show you is that so this get property is outputting the current value for email, but if I look at my user, the initial value for email before it's been set will be null, because this private string email will be initialized to null, and the same for password, and that's why we've got the text null coming out in our form here. So to fix that, I'm going to go to this user bean and set initial values for these things. Let's set email and password to empty strings. And I'll set message equal to an empty string as well, because actually I come to think of it, I don't really need this initial value here. And also, if I'm going to give them initial values, whoops, I probably don't really need this validation code here that checks if they're equal to null, because now they can't be, so I'll just delete that. And now if I run the form again, let's run it. When I initially go to the form, then the values for these form controls are just empty strings, which is what I wanted. But now look what will happen if I submit the form, because actually even if I just type values for this in the URL, actually I'll show you this in my Google Chrome browser, because I don't want to mess up the session here. But if I go to Chrome here and I paste this in, when I initially go to this URL, the bean doesn't have any values set, so it says okay, use bean and set the properties of the bean from the parameters, but there aren't any parameters, so there's nothing to set. And then when it echoes them back here, it's just echoing back the default values for these parameters, which are empty strings, because I set that in the user bean up here to empty strings. But if there were parameters, whether they're post parameters or get parameters, they are going to set the bean, and then later on they're going to be output in the form fields. So if I set, for example, here email equals, and I could type any old garbage for email here, let's just set John, you can see that that's going to come out in the form control. Now the value of this is that if the form can't be validated, so imagine that let's run this form and let's type some value in here. Let's say John let me in. So the first one should be an email address, but don't worry about it now. Click OK. So when I clicked OK, I actually went, it was very brief so you can't really see it, but it's actually submitted values for this and then gone back to this page. But when it goes back to the page, of course it's got the post parameters that were submitted by the form, and they are gathered by the bean here, and then they're output in the form controls. So if validation fails in your form, the user doesn't have to type all the values in the form again, which obviously is really useful. But now if I add another couple of little things in here, I can make sure that if the bean can validate itself, then it will then take the user to a different URL. So let's look at how we can do that. Now one thing I'm going to do is I want to have a message that tells the user what the problem is if the form can't be validated. And of course, to really make the message look nice, you'll need some HTML and design skills and some CSS, but I'm just going to output a really simple message here. And I could use an expression tag again, but let's just use a get property tag since I've started using get property tags. H2. So this is just a header tag that makes a nice big message, and I'm going to set the property to message, and the get property will work for message because I've got a get message method here, and that's what allows get property to work, because get property is really equivalent to having an expression tag with user1.getMessage in this case. Now my message is initially set to an empty string as well, and so when I initially go to the form, this message is going to be just blank. Now I want to have some code up here that sees if the bean can be validated. Let's have a scriptlet tag, and I'm going to say here if user1.validate, then I won't go on to do the rest of the stuff. I'll forward to a different URL. So let's say here request.getRequestDispatcher, and let's forward to, and the forward is relative to the context root, so let's say forward to controller, and my controller.java is just going to output the value of email. It's ignoring the value for password, but of course you could easily collect the value for password in the same way that you collect the value for email. And let's also forward on the parameters. That's very important. So let's say forward request and response, like that. Now one problem here is that now if I run this, so if I run this now, it's gonna try to this is gonna try to validate the form straight away, even though I've just gone to the form, so there can't possibly be any filled in values, and I don't really want to validate it. And it's straight away it's saying, okay, you haven't filled in a value for email, but I've just gone to the form, so how can I have filled in a value for email? Let's just see that in Chrome. So if I have an incognito window in Chrome, and in fact that's still got the session, so I'm just going to quit that, and let's start a new incognito window here, and there we go, invalid email address. And I don't want that, of course, because when you first go to the form I don't really want it to validate stuff. And to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the form a hidden control, and there's so many different ways you could do this, but this is one good way that works. And once you understand the basic building blocks of this, of course you can figure out exactly how to do your own version of it. And you could have, for example, you could highlight particular fields that can't be validated if you want, by returning the name in the field that can't be validated from the bean and that kind of thing. But anyway, let's say here input type equals hidden. So I just want a hidden parameter here, and let's say name equals, I'll just click action, and value equals let's say submit, or let's say form submit. And then what I can do is the first time you go to the form URL, that parameter won't be set, but if you submit the form, then this parameter will be set. So here I can say string action equals request dot get parameter, and get parameter action, and I can say that if action is not equal to null, and in fact that's enough in itself really, but I could also double check and say and action dot equals, and in here I could put this. So if the form has been submitted once, in other words, and hence the action parameter is set, then I could go on to do this stuff. Just formatting it there with Control Shift and F. Otherwise I don't bother. And now I think, fingers crossed, I've got a form that will work. So let's just run this, because I need to restart the server here, and I'm just going to go to this in Chrome, and because I want a new kind of clean session. So yeah, so I'd like this to give me the URL, but if I go into the down arrow here, so I want this URL. Let's copy that, Control X, because of course the session is set via a cookie, so if I set it in an incognito window and then quit the incognito window in Chrome, it's going to forget the session, which is what I want here for debugging purposes. So we'll go to that form, and initially you see no error message, and let's type some invalid input, let me in. So the email address is not right here, and the password's not long enough, and I click OK. It says invalid email address. Let's type a valid email address, click OK. Password must be at least 8 characters. Let's type a decent password, click OK. And now finally we've forwarded to the controller, and we've got this. And of course the user at the moment can click back and go to the form again, but if you wanted to stop them doing that, then you could, of course, in your controller, you could have a redirect here, which would redirect them to another URL, which makes it harder for them to go back again. But that's enough for this tutorial. That's just a really basic self-validating form, and of course there are lots of possibilities here. As I say, you could get the controller, the user bean here. This could have another field that stores the particular name of the field that can't be validated, and then in your form you could say something like well, you could get that parameter, and with a bit of CSS you could then highlight the particular field that can be validated. But to do that you just need all the techniques that I've showed you here from a programming point of view, and you'd also need a little bit of CSS and HTML, which is outside the scope of this tutorial series. But there's lots of good tutorials on CSS and HTML on the internet, of course. So we'll leave that here, and in the next tutorial we're going to look at a slightly different flavour of this, just using a stricter model view controller architecture, because this sort of breaks model view controller architecture just because the form is submitting not to the controller, so all the requests are strictly speaking not going through the controller. But you might not care about that, because after all this is only one page and the page is going to itself, and when the form can be validated it does go to the controller, so it's not too serious a break of MVC architecture. But for purists we're going to look at a pure version of that in the next tutorial. So that's it for now, and until next time, happy coding.